All right, it's Friday, March 29th, and this is an end of the first quarter recap for the SPY of 2024. I'm actually looking at a yearly chart right here, so we'll start with the very big picture, and then we'll kind of see how price action has unfolded to start the year, where it may be headed. First of all, this yearly chart, if you really look at it, it's obviously green and way above the open. So for the entire year, we are kind of bullish to the upside. And if you really think about it, these last 3 years has been a big consolidation year. So there's no reason why this couldn't stay green and by the end of the year and then follow through, for a whole nother push up. It's built up a lot of energy here on an overall uptrend for another leg up. So for everyone looking for kind of a bear market, we're nowhere near that right now. And, as long as we stay above the open of the year, we'll stay green, even though we might be due for a little bit of a pause, given that we've been kind of straight up since October. So now I go to the quarterly chart. This is the end of March here, and we close strongly green. So one way or another, I kind of expect that high to be tested. I've shot some videos on that. If we start a little lower first, then at some point we should come up and test that high. And if we start up higher first, it's possible at that point we'll look at the opening price action. And if that eventually turns red, maybe we're due for a little bit of a quarterly pause, but we'll get into that in a minute. And finally, on the monthly chart, again, a big green bar, but you can start seeing we're starting to get extended on the monthly time frame. So we're expecting that high to be taken out. But again, at any point, you can get a pause, a red, something like this. You can get an inside bar. You can get a little pullback, and so on. And if we even go to the weekly chart here, again, closing with a green week, we're very extended on this chart. I think we had one bar that actually had and this is a short time frame, that actually had a 2 down bar. So clearly we can get some red at any moment here. We've been talking about that possibility, in the weeks prior, but it really hasn't happened yet. And then the more, you try to go down and can't do it, the more that, you get excited to continue the upside. But anyway, so let's just quickly see how this week unfolded, and then what could be developing, because I mostly day trade, so I'm more interested in the day-to-day activity, even though the big picture I know is still up, but I do know there's exhaustion risk. So just looking at the weekly chart here, how it closed, I was talking all week long how I was expecting this prior week's high to be tested, and it happened here at the very end of the day. If we go to the daily chart here now, these were the 4 days of the week. I was expecting that weekly high to be tested all week, and eventually we got there and we took it out and then closed with a bit of a shooter bar. So that's kind of interesting that in the very, very short run, we might start lower here before taking out those monthly and quarterly highs up here. So we'll see what happens, starting next week. If we look at the 15-minute chart from Thursday, yesterday, you could see here, we opened above the pre-market highs and kind of at the pre-market highs, followed through a little bit. At that point on, it was just sideways. I discussed how on this index, I, traded a little bit and then broke even, and I was expecting that high to be tested, which is this upper blue line. Boom, and eventually at the end of the day, it just decided to go up there, and then it fell right back. So it achieved its goal of taking out last week's high with a bit of a shooter bar here. So you kind of expect that bar to continue lower. So this becomes interesting in terms of how the next quarter starts off. Let's say you start lower here with a 2 down. You're kind of anticipating that this would be the target to the downside, and all of a sudden you're very close to the weekly low. So a 2 down here that starts lower right out of the gates could be coming down to this area, and that could set off a chain reaction to get a 2 down weekly bar, which then projects possibly down, to the bottom of this range down here. Now, I drew this green line because this is an interesting, area here. The green line is the midpoint on the monthly chart. So if that kind of hold, you can start out any month, you're not going to likely gap up with a open is going to be right at the low and go up green all month. At some point, even on these green months, you get a little bit of a pullback first, in here and here. This one started down for a day or two. Even this one maybe had 1 day down. But, given that we're at exhaustion risk, I wouldn't be surprised to kind of maybe come down to the halfway point of that month and then eventually take out the monthly high and the quarterly high as described. So, if we end up with a 2 down day, let's see if that takes us down to, we'll first monitor if it hits our target down here. If that happens, that's almost very close to this area, which gets a 2 down week, which then begins to project all the way down here. But we have this gap in play that I was kind of talking about. You can see between this high and this low, and that's the midpoint, right? This green line, midpoint of the prior month, is right within this gap. So that could be an area we come down, take it, kind of get a 1, 2, 3 pullback, hold this area, and then start back up towards that quarterly and monthly high that I was talking about should be taken out. So we will see if that develops. Those are the types of things. I know I'm getting way ahead of myself, but if we come down, and we'll go day by day as always, but keep in mind that the big picture still wants to test higher. So if we go down first and we kind of have price action that kind of holds in this area and reverses up, just know we're getting another push up in line with the monthly and quarterly charts, and we'll deal with that when and if it develops. If we start up first, which is certainly possible, we take out that monthly and quarterly high. This is the monthly high, and then, I described the quarterly high. So what we'll look for there, if we go up first, is at any moment, we'll have an opening price on Monday, and that'll be the benchmark. And if we head up and start green, but then come below that and get red, this could be the quarterly or monthly pullback. If we look down here, for example, it was a red bar, at these lows, and you had a buying tail, but you maybe expecting those lows to be tested. You went down, and as soon as that quarterly chart turned green, you were biased to the upside for the next 3 months. Until it turned red again. So in the same way, if this goes up and then turns red, I'm going to be biased to the downs, even though, it took out its high, which I expected. We're at exhaustion risk. But if it turns red on the quarterly and monthly basis, I'll stay biased to the downside until we get above that. You never know if you're going to get a deeper pullback, but I'll stay biased to the downside until it turns green again for the most part. And with how that's going to happen, if we come down and we're red on the quarterly basis, is somehow that weekly chart's going to have to start turning green first. So anyway, those are the possibilities. Here's the weekly chart again. Either we start lower going into next week and, test some areas and then know we're going to probably take out those highs on the bigger picture, or we start higher and then the bigger picture, charts turn red and we'll stay, we'll look for a deeper pullback at that point because we already tested the high and then we're coming down. So let's see those are kind of the way I see it. I still think the big bias is to the upside. So even if we get some kind of red pullback, it's possible on the daily chart here and on the weekly chart, but eventually that's going to turn green again in line with the year and we can go a lot higher. So we'll keep that in mind. So that's kind of a recap, but the main thing for this past week is you had the 4 days here that eventually moved up and took out that weekly high, and I discussed actually all week long how it was kind of tricky trading in here, even though you were expecting that, you're expecting this weekly high to be taken out, but all 4 days were kind of tricky in terms of the SPY. This one gapped down and then it moved up. This one gapped up, but then it kind of moved lower. Then you kind of gapped up, but you had a big reversal here, but then it started lower before moving higher, and then today, yesterday it just went sideways all day before moving up there. So this was a very tricky way to get to those highs, but it eventually got there as anticipated. But and I also discussed on previous videos how you didn't get hurt trading this type of action if you looked at the way I looked at the 15-minute chart and the pre-market range and and the first bar and everything else. So it wasn't a day, a week to get hurt with any kind of day trading, but it certainly wasn't easy to follow it to the high. So that's kind of a recap right here, and we'll kind of end it there and kind of see how things open to start the quarter on or the second quarter on Monday.